The bruises were easy to hide. The fear, that was harder. Arya Quinn had perfected the art of invisibility. Foundation thick enough to cover purple shadows. Sleeves long enough to hide fingerprints pressed into flesh. Smiles bright enough to blind anyone from looking closer. For 3 years she'd been disappearing, piece by piece, bruise by bruise, into a life that was slowly killing her. But today, everything would change. Today she would walk into a building owned by a man who saw through every lie she'd ever told herself, and he wouldn't look away. If you want to see how Arya escapes the chains that bind her, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that made Arya flinch. She caught herself immediately, the slight jerk of her shoulders, the instinctive tightening of her jaw, and forced her body back into the careful stillness she'd practiced for years. No sudden movements, no reactions, nothing that would make anyone look twice. The lobby of Vex Tower stretched before her like a cathedral of glass and steel. 47 floors of gleaming corporate power, where every surface reflected back a version of perfection. Marble floors polished to mirrors, chrome fixtures that caught and multiplied the morning light. Even the air felt expensive here, cool and filtered, carrying the faint scent of money and ambition. Arya's heels clicked against the stone as she crossed the vast space, each step carefully measured. Her right leg screamed with every movement, a deep, bone-aching pain that radiated from her hip down to her ankle. But she kept her gait smooth, even. She'd learned to walk through pain the way other people walked through rain, inevitably, but without complaint. The bruise on her hip was 3 days old. She knew because she'd counted, the way she always counted. 3 days since Marcus had shoved her into the kitchen counter, hard enough to leave an imprint of the drawer handle in her flesh. 3 days of sleeping on her left side. 3 days of telling herself it would fade, like all the others had. It always faded. Until the next time. "Morning, Ms. Quinn." The security guard at the main desk nodded as she passed, his smile professional and distant. "Morning, James." Arya returned the smile with one she'd perfected. Warm, but not too warm. Friendly, but not familiar. The kind of smile that invited no questions and offered no openings. She was 32 minutes late. The thought sent a spike of anxiety through her chest, sharp enough to make her breath catch. Marcus had been in one of his moods this morning, the dangerous kind, where his eyes went flat and his voice dropped to that terrible softness that meant she needed to be very, very careful about everything she said and did. She'd made coffee wrong, too weak apparently, though she'd made it the exact same way she always did. But that didn't matter when Marcus decided something was wrong. When he decided she needed to be reminded who was in charge. The coffee cup had hit the wall 6 inches from her head. She'd cleaned up the ceramic shards while he watched, his silence more threatening than any words. Then he'd left for his shift at the warehouse, and she'd waited the required 15 minutes, not too soon, never too soon, before gathering her things and fleeing to the only place she could still pretend to be whole. Work. Arya pressed the button for the 33rd floor, watching the numbers climb as the elevator rose. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished steel doors, a woman in a navy blazer and white blouse, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her makeup flawless. Professional, competent, completely, utterly fine. No one would look at her and see the truth. That was the point. The 33rd floor housed the corporate offices of Meridian Analytics, one of dozens of companies that leased space in Vex Tower. Arya had worked here for 8 months, long enough to be good at her job, not long enough for anyone to know her well. She liked it that way. Shallow relationships meant fewer questions, fewer chances for someone to notice the things she worked so hard to hide. "Arya, there you are." Rebecca Chen, her supervisor, appeared the moment the elevator doors opened, her expression tight with stress. "The client meeting starts in 10 minutes. Did you finish the Thompson report?" "Yes, it's ready." Arya pulled a flash drive from her bag, keeping her movement smooth despite the way her hand wanted to shake. Full analysis, projections through Q4, and the revised budget scenarios they requested. Rebecca's shoulders dropped half an inch in relief. "Thank God. I swear, you're the only person on this team I can count on." She paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You okay? You look a little pale." "Just didn't sleep well." Arya's smile was automatic, practiced. "Too much coffee, not enough rest. You know how it is." "Tell me about it." Rebecca was already turning away, crisis averted, moving on to the next fire that needed putting out. Conference room B, 5 minutes. Mr. Vex himself is sitting in on this one. The words made Arya's stomach drop. Dorian Vex. She'd never met him, never even seen him in person, but everyone who worked in this building knew his name. The man who'd built an empire from nothing, who owned half the commercial real estate in the city, whose reputation for cold precision made even seasoned executives nervous. He never attended client meetings. Never. Why? Arya started, but Rebecca was already gone, disappearing around a corner with her phone pressed to her ear. Arya stood frozen in the hallway, her heart suddenly racing for reasons that had nothing to do with being late. Dorian Vex didn't involve himself in the day-to-day operations of his tenants' businesses. He was a ghost in his own building, present everywhere and nowhere, his influence felt but his person rarely seen. Until apparently today. She forced herself to move, walking to her cubicle to drop off her bag and retrieve the printed copies of the report she'd stayed up until 2 a.m. perfecting. Her hands were steadier now, falling into the familiar rhythm of work tasks that had clear beginnings and endings, unlike everything else in her life. The bathroom was empty when she slipped inside, and Arya allowed herself 30 seconds, just 30, to lean against the sink and breathe. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirror, and she studied it with a critical eye that had become second nature. The bruise on her cheekbone was hidden under 2 layers of concealer and powder. The split in her lower lip from 2 weeks ago had finally healed. The fingerprint bruises on her upper arms were completely covered by her blazer. She looked fine. Professional, normal. She looked like a woman who had her life together. The lie was so perfect, it almost made her laugh. Instead, she straightened her blazer, checked her lipstick, and walked out with her shoulders back and her head high. Fake it until you make it, right? That's what all the motivational posters said, though they never mentioned what to do when you'd been faking it so long you couldn't remember what making it was supposed to feel like. Conference room B was already filled when she arrived, exactly 3 minutes early, which meant she was actually late by corporate standards. The Thompson client sat on one side of the long glass table, Rebecca and 2 other team members on the other. And at the head of the table, in a chair that somehow seemed larger than all the others despite being identical, sat a man who could only be Dorian Vex. Arya's breath caught. She'd expected someone intimidating, his reputation demanded it, but she hadn't expected this. Dorian Vex looked like he'd been carved from marble in darkness, all sharp angles and controlled power. He was probably in his late 30s, with black hair cut short, and features that would have been handsome if they weren't so cold. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Arya's monthly rent, and his eyes were the color of steel, and they were looking directly at her. Not glancing, not casual acknowledgement, looking. The kind of look that peeled back layers and saw things you didn't want seen. Arya felt herself freeze in the doorway, caught in that gaze like a rabbit in headlights. For one horrible moment, she was certain he could see everything. Every bruise beneath her clothes, every lie beneath her smile, every piece of her that was breaking apart in slow motion. Then Rebecca was gesturing to an empty chair, and the moment passed. "Sorry I'm late," Arya murmured, sliding into the seat and distributing the printed reports with hands that were, thankfully, steady. Traffic was terrible. No problem. Rebecca launched immediately into her opening remarks, and the meeting began. Arya had sat through hundreds of these presentations. She knew the rhythm, the dance of corporate communication where everyone said exactly what they meant in the most indirect way possible. The Thompson account was important, a potential 6-figure contract that would make Rebecca's quarter and secure the team's bonuses. The clients were skeptical but interested, asking pointed questions about ROI and implementation timelines. Arya answered when called upon, her voice clear and confident, laying out data points and projections with the ease of someone who'd lived inside the numbers for weeks. This was her safe space, the world of spreadsheets and analytics where everything had a logical answer and the only thing that could hurt you was bad math. But she could feel Dorian Vex watching her. Not constantly, not obviously, but several times during the 90-minute meeting, she caught his gaze on her with that same unsettling intensity. He asked no questions, made no comments. He simply sat at the head of the table like a king observing his domain, and occasionally he looked at her like he could see straight through to her bones. It should have made her nervous, and it did. But there was something else there too, something that felt almost like recognition, like he saw her not as a corporate drone delivering a presentation, but as a human being. That was more terrifying than anything else. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises to follow up within 48 hours. The clients left looking satisfied, and Rebecca was practically glowing with success. Arya gathered the unused copies of the report, ready to escape back to the relative safety of her cubicle, when that steel-gray voice cut through the room. "Miss Quinn, a word." It wasn't a question. Arya turned to find Dorian Vex still seated at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Rebecca and the others had already filtered out, leaving the two of them alone in the glass-walled room. "Yes, sir?" Arya's voice came out steadier than she felt. "You're limping." 3 words, delivered with the casualness of a comment about the weather, but they hit Arya like a physical blow. She started to smile, to deflect, to lie. "I twisted my ankle yesterday. Nothing serious." "That's not an ankle injury." Dorian's eyes never left hers. "That's a hip injury, deep tissue damage, judging by the way you're compensating with your lower back. At least 3 days old, possibly 4. The air left Arya's lungs in a rush. No one had noticed. No one ever noticed. She'd perfected the art of moving through pain without showing it, of hiding injuries beneath layers of normal. But this man had looked at her for less than 2 hours and cataloged her damage like he was reading a report. "I appreciate your concern," Arya said carefully, reaching for the professional mask that had never failed her before. "But I'm fine. Really." "No." Dorian stood, and Arya realized for the first time how tall he was, easily 6'2", with the kind of presence that made the room feel smaller. "You're not fine. You're functioning. There's a difference. Mr. Vex, the bruise on your cheekbone is covered by 2 layers of concealer." His voice was clinical, detached, as if he were describing a piece of furniture rather than her face. "The foundation is a shade too dark for your skin tone, which means you're prioritizing coverage over color match. Your sleeves are long despite the building temperature being set to 72 degrees, and you flinched when the elevator doors opened this morning." Arya felt the blood drain from her face. "You're mistaken." "I'm not." Dorian tilted his head slightly, studying her with the focus of a scientist examining a specimen. "And we both know it." The silence that followed was suffocating. Arya's mind raced, searching for an exit strategy, a plausible explanation, anything that would let her escape this room without shattering the careful fiction she'd built. But Dorian Vex stood between her and the door, and something in his posture told her he had no intention of moving until he got what he wanted. The truth. "I don't know what you think you see," Arya said slowly, "but I assure you everything is—" "Don't." The word cut through her deflection like a blade. "Don't insult both of us with more lies. You're already carrying enough of them." Arya's hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms hard enough to hurt. The pain grounded her, reminded her that she was still here, still standing, still in control. "What do you want from me?" "The truth would be a start." Dorian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those steel-gray eyes, something that might have been anger, except it wasn't directed at her. "Who's hurting you?" "No one." "Ms. Quinn." Her name on his lips sounded different, harder. "I've built my career on reading people, on seeing what they don't want seen. And right now, I'm seeing a woman who walks like every step costs her, who carries herself like she's afraid the world might shatter if she moves too quickly. I'm seeing someone who spent so long pretending to be fine that she's forgotten what fine actually feels like." Arya's throat tightened. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough." Dorian moved then, not toward her but to the side, giving her a clear path to the door. "An exit. An escape. I know that whoever is doing this to you has convinced you it's normal, that you deserve it, that you have no other choice." He paused. "I'm here to tell you that's a lie." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and clear and completely impossible. Arya laughed, a broken, bitter sound that surprised even her. "Is that what this is? You think you can save me? You don't even know me." "You're right. I don't." Dorian's voice remained steady, unmoved by her outburst. "But I know what it looks like when someone is drowning. And I know that if you walk out of this building today and go back to whoever is putting bruises under your clothes, There's a very real chance you won't walk out again next time. The statement landed like a punch to her chest, because he was right. The thought had lived in the back of Arya's mind for months now, growing louder with each accident, each misunderstanding, each time Marcus's hands had closed around her throat or his fist had found her ribs. The fear that one day he would go too far, that one day the bruises would be internal, fatal, final. I can't. Arya's voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. You don't understand. It's complicated. It always is. Dorian's expression softened fractionally, just enough to be noticeable. But complications don't change the fundamental fact you're in danger, and you have a choice right now. Go back to that danger or stay here where you're safe. Safe. Arya repeated the word like it was foreign. For how long? An hour? A day? You can't protect me forever, Mr. Vex. You don't even know what you're offering. Then let me be clear. Dorian reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. Plain white, nothing but a phone number embossed in black. He set it on the table between them. My private line. Not my office, not my assistant. Me. If you call that number, I will answer. If you need somewhere to go, I will provide it. If you need protection, I will ensure it. No conditions, no expectations, no strings attached. Arya stared at the card like it was a live grenade. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. For the first time since the conversation began, something like emotion flickered across Dorian's face. It was gone too quickly to name, but it left an impression, a shadow of something old and painful. Because someone should have done it for someone I loved, he said quietly. And they didn't. And I've spent the last 15 years making sure I never stand by and watch it happen again. The words settled in Arya's chest like stones. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, that her situation was different, that Marcus wasn't really that bad. All the justifications she'd used to convince herself to stay were right there, ready to deploy. But standing in this glass-walled room with a stranger who'd seen through her in under 2 hours, Arya couldn't make herself say them, couldn't make herself believe them. Maybe she never had. I have to go, she heard herself say, backing toward the door with her hand already on the handle. I'm sorry, but I can't. This isn't... Take the card. Arya looked back to find Dorian still standing by the table, his posture unchanged, his expression unreadable. Even if you don't use it, he continued, take it, just in case. Her hand moved before her brain could stop it, reaching for the small rectangle of paper. The cardstock was heavy, expensive, real. She slipped it into her blazer pocket where it settled like a secret against her ribs. Thank you, she said, though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. The offer, the attention, the fact that someone had finally seen her. Dorian nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. The offer stands, whenever you're ready. Arya fled. There was no other word for it. She left the conference room at just under a run, her heels clicking frantically against the polished floors as she navigated back to her cubicle. Her heart was racing, her hands were shaking, and somewhere deep in her chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope was trying to take root. She crushed it immediately. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. Hope got you hurt worse when reality inevitably reasserted itself. Arya knew better than to hope. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of emails and spreadsheets, familiar tasks that let her sink back into the comfortable numbness of routine. Rebecca stopped by to gush about the successful meeting, to praise Arya's presentation skills, to hint at possible promotions if the Thompson contract came through. Arya smiled and nodded in all the right places, playing her part perfectly. By 5:47 p.m., her phone had buzzed with 3 texts from Marcus. 5:12 p.m. Where are you? 5:34 p.m. Answer me 5:47 p.m. You better be home by 6. Each message made her stomach tighten a little more. She had 13 minutes to make a 20-minute commute, which meant she was already late, which meant Marcus would already be angry. The calculation was automatic, inevitable. What kind of anger? How bad would it be? What could she do to minimize it? Arya was gathering her things when her phone buzzed again. Don't make me come get you. Her hands froze on her bag. Marcus had never come to her workplace before. That was the unspoken rule. Work was her space, the one place he didn't intrude. But the threat in those 6 words was clear. That boundary only existed as long as he allowed it to. She was out the door in seconds, moving as fast as her injured hip would allow. The elevator ride down felt endless, each floor ticking by with agonizing slowness. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning her apology, her explanation, the exact words she'd need to diffuse whatever mood Marcus was in. "I'm sorry. Traffic was bad. My boss kept me late. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." The litany was so familiar it might as well have been a prayer. The lobby was mostly empty at this hour, just a few stragglers from other offices heading home. Arya pushed through the revolving doors into the early evening air, already searching the street for a cab or rideshare that could get her home faster than the bus. Arya. Her name, spoken in a voice she knew too well. Arya's blood turned to ice. Marcus stood 20 feet away, leaning against a concrete planter with his arms crossed and his expression dark. He wore his warehouse uniform, stained cargo pants and a gray shirt with his name embroidered on the chest, but there was nothing casual about his posture. He looked coiled, ready to spring. "Marcus!" Her voice came out steadier than she felt, trained through years of practice. "What are you doing here?" "Came to pick you up." He pushed off the planter and started toward her, his stride easy but his eyes locked on her face like a predator tracking prey. "Since you seem to have trouble getting home on time." "I was just leaving." "You were just leaving an hour ago." Marcus stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that anyone watching would think they were having an intimate conversation. "But I guess your fancy office job is more important than respecting my time." "That's not—" Arya caught herself, swallowed the automatic defense. Arguing only made it worse. "I'm sorry. The meeting ran late, and then my boss needed—" "I don't care." Marcus's hand shot out and caught her elbow, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough that she couldn't pull away without making a scene. "Come on, we're going home." Arya let herself be pulled toward the parking garage, her mind already disconnecting the way it always did when Marcus got like this. It was easier to float above it, to let her body go through the motions while her mind went somewhere safe and far away. They were 10 feet from his truck when a voice cut through the evening air. "Ms. Quinn!" Arya's head snapped up to find Dorian Vex standing at the entrance to the parking garage, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. He was still in his suit from earlier, but his jacket was unbuttoned and his tie slightly loosened, the closest thing to casual Arya had seen from him. Marcus's grip on her elbow tightened. "Mr. Vex." Arya's smile was automatic, professional. "Is there something—" "I need you to review the Thompson projections one more time before they're finalized." Dorian's tone was casual, like he was discussing nothing more significant than office supplies, but his eyes never left Marcus's hand on Arya's arm. "The clients are calling first thing tomorrow, and I want to make sure we have the numbers locked down." It was a lie. A blatant, obvious lie. The Thompson numbers were perfect. The clients wouldn't call until next week at the earliest. And Dorian Vex didn't personally review junior analyst projections, ever. But Marcus didn't know that. "Now?" Marcus's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "It's after 6. "Unfortunately, yes." Dorian's gaze shifted to Marcus for the first time, and something in his expression made Arya's boyfriend take an unconscious step back. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical to the deal. I'm sure you understand, business waits for no one." The two men stared at each other for a long moment, sizing each other up. Marcus was taller, broader, built like someone who'd spent years doing physical labor. But Dorian had something else, a quiet, absolute authority that made him seem larger than his actual size. "How long?" Marcus asked, the words clipped. "An hour, maybe 2. Dorian's tone suggested this was non-negotiable. "I'll make sure she gets home safely." Arya felt Marcus's fingers dig into her elbow hard enough to make her wince. But then he was releasing her, stepping back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Fine." He looked at Arya and she saw the promise in his gaze. This wasn't over. "I'll see you at home, babe. Don't be too late." He kissed her forehead, possessive, marking, before turning and walking to his truck. Arya watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing she'd pay for this later. Knowing Marcus would see it as a challenge, a boundary crossed. knowing it would be bad. Come on. Dorian's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Let's get you inside. Arya turned to find him holding the door open, waiting. She should have argued, should have thanked him and gotten in Marcus's truck like a good girlfriend, should have done anything except follow this stranger back into the building. Instead, she walked forward on shaking legs and let the glass doors close behind her, sealing her inside Vex Tower like a sanctuary she had no right to claim. The elevator ride to the 47th floor felt like ascending into another world entirely. Arya stood beside Dorian in silence, watching the numbers climb with a detachment that felt dangerously close to shock. Her elbow still throbbed where Marcus had gripped it. Not hard enough to bruise this time, but the threat had been there. The promise of what waited when she finally went home. Because she would have to go home eventually. The thought sat in her chest like a stone. There are no Thompson projections to review, Arya said quietly, her eyes fixed on the ascending numbers. 39, 40, 41. No, Dorian agreed. There aren't. So why am I here? Because you needed a reason to not get in that truck. His voice was matter-of-fact, clinical, and he needed to believe that reason was more important than his authority over you. The words made something twist in Arya's stomach. Authority. Like Marcus owned her. Like she was property to be controlled rather than a person making choices. Except, wasn't that exactly what she'd become? The elevator chimed softly as it reached the top floor. The doors opened onto a private lobby that made the main entrance look modest by comparison. Everything here was darker, richer, black marble floors, walls of tinted glass that offered panoramic views of the city, furniture that looked more like art installations than places to sit. This way. Dorian led her down a hallway where their footsteps were swallowed by thick carpeting. He stopped at a set of double doors and pressed his palm to a biometric scanner. The lock disengaged with a soft click. His office was exactly what Arya expected, and nothing like it at the same time. The space was massive, taking up at least a quarter of the entire floor. One wall was entirely glass, offering an unobstructed view of the city spread out below like a map of lights and shadows. The furniture was minimal but expensive, a desk that looked carved from a single piece of black wood, leather chairs that probably cost more than her car, bookshelves lined with what appeared to be actual first editions. But what caught Arya's attention were the monitors. 6 large screens mounted on the wall opposite the windows, each one divided into smaller frames showing different angles of the building. She could see the lobby, the parking garage, various floors and hallways, a complete surveillance system that covered every public space in Vex Tower. You watch everything, she said, the realization settling over her like cold water. I watch my investment. Dorian moved to a cabinet and pulled out a first aid kit that looked more comprehensive than what most hospitals kept on hand. Sit. It wasn't a request. Arya lowered herself into one of the leather chairs, her hips screaming in protest. She'd been standing and walking for hours, pushing through pain that had only gotten worse as the day progressed. Now that she was finally still, her body was demanding payment for the abuse. Dorian set the first aid kit on the coffee table and pulled up a chair across from her. His movements were efficient, practiced, like he'd done this before. Where are you hurt? I'm fine, Ms. Quinn. He looked at her with those steel-gray eyes that saw too much. We've already established that you're not fine. What we're determining now is the extent of the damage. So I'll ask again. Where are you hurt? Arya's hands clenched in her lap. Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to minimize, to protect the careful fiction she'd built. But sitting here in this office 47 floors above the street, with Marcus temporarily banished and nowhere left to run, the lies felt impossibly heavy. My hip, she heard herself say. Right side. And my ribs on the left. The hip is worse. Dorian nodded once, pulled out a cold pack and cracked it to activate the chemical reaction. How long ago? 3 days for the hip. The ribs are older, maybe a week. Have you seen a doctor? Arya almost laughed. No. Why not? The question was so absurdly naive that it broke something in her carefully maintained composure. Because doctors ask questions. They file reports. They call the police. She met his gaze, letting him see the bitter truth in her eyes. And then I go home to someone who knows I told. Dorian's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. He held out the cold pack. Put this on your hip. Over your clothes is fine. Arya took it with shaking hands, pressing the blessed cold against the injury through her slacks. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, bringing tears to her eyes that she blinked back furiously. How long? Dorian asked, his voice quieter now. How long what? How long has he been hurting you? The question hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Arya could count the people who knew the truth on one hand, her mother, who told her to try harder to make Marcus happy, her former best friend, who'd stopped calling after Marcus convinced Arya she was a bad influence, and now this stranger who'd seen through her in a single morning. 3 years, she whispered. Give or take. Dorian was silent for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Arya look up. My sister's name was Elena. The shift in conversation was so unexpected that Arya blinked. What? Elena Vex. Dorian stood and walked to the windows, his back to Arya, his silhouette dark against the city lights. She was 2 years younger than me, smart, beautiful, full of life. She met a man when she was 23. He was charming, attentive, everything she thought she wanted. Arya's chest tightened. She knew where this story was going. It started small, Dorian continued, his voice distant. Criticism disguised as concern, isolation packaged as devotion. By the time the physical abuse started, she was so cut off from everyone who loved her that she had no one to turn to. He paused. Or so she thought. What happened? Arya asked, though part of her didn't want to know. I found out. Saw the bruises she tried to hide when she came to visit for Christmas. I told her to leave him, offered her money, a place to stay, protection, everything. Dorian's hands curled into fists at his sides. She said she couldn't, that it was complicated, that he needed her. All the things people say when they've been conditioned to believe abuse is love. The silence that followed was suffocating. She went back to him, Dorian said finally. And 6 months later, I got a call from the hospital. He'd beaten her so badly that she was in a coma. She died 3 days later without ever waking up. Arya felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. For Elena. For herself. For every woman who'd ever believed the lie that they deserved the pain. I'm sorry, she whispered. Dorian turned back to face her, and his expression was carved from stone. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Be angry. Be anything except accepting of what's happening to you. He moved back to his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. That man out there, Marcus, he's escalating. The fact that he showed up at your workplace is a boundary violation. Next time it'll be something worse. And there will be a next time, Ms. Quinn. There always is. You don't understand, Arya said, her voice breaking. I can't just leave. It's not that simple. Why not? Because... She stopped, her mind racing through all the reasons she'd compiled over 3 years. The apartment was in both their names. She had nowhere else to go. He'd promised to change. He only got violent when he was stressed. She loved him. He loved her. It wasn't always bad. But sitting here with Dorian Vex, looking at her like she was worth saving, all those reasons sounded like exactly what they were. Excuses. Justifications she'd created to avoid the terrifying prospect of leaving. I'm afraid, she finally admitted, the words tearing out of her throat like shards of glass. I'm afraid that if I leave, he'll find me. That he'll hurt me worse. That he'll... She couldn't finish the sentence. Kill her. The unspoken words hung between them anyway. He might try, Dorian said, his voice steady. That's why you don't do this alone. That's why you have resources, protection, a plan. He pulled out his phone and unlocked it, turning the screen toward her. I'm going to show you something. You don't have to decide anything right now, but I want you to see what's possible. The screen showed a document, a lease agreement for an apartment in a building Arya recognized as one of the luxury high-rises downtown. The name on the lease was blank, but everything else was filled out. Move-in date, security deposit, first and last month's rent, all paid. I keep 3 apartments in this building for situations exactly like yours, Dorian explained. Women who need a safe place to land while they figure out their next steps. The building has 24-hour security, cameras on every floor, and a concierge who's been trained to recognize and respond to domestic violence situations. Arya stared at the screen, her mind struggling to process what he was offering. You're saying I could just move in tonight? Tonight? Tomorrow? Next week? Whenever you're ready. Dorian locked his phone and pocketed it. The offer stands indefinitely, no strings attached, no expectations. Just a safe place to sleep where no one will hurt you. It sounded too good to be true. Nothing in Arya's life had ever been that simple, that clean. There had to be a catch, a price she'd have to pay. What do you want from me? The question came out harsher than she intended. Really? Because people don't just do this out of the goodness of their hearts. Everyone wants something. Dorian's expression didn't change. I want you to live. That's all. I want you to have the chance my sister never got. If that means providing an apartment, I'll provide an apartment. If it means hiring security, I'll hire security. If it means going to court and testifying about what he's done, I'll do that too. He paused. I have resources most people don't, and I've spent the last 15 years using them to make sure other women don't end up like Elena. The sincerity in his voice was almost painful to hear. Arya wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that someone could offer help without hidden motives. But 3 years with Marcus had taught her that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. I need to think, she said finally, pressing the cold pack harder against her hip. It's a lot. Take all the time you need. Dorian stood and moved back to his desk, giving her space. But while you're thinking, there's something practical we need to address. What? You have to go home tonight. His words were flat, stating a fact rather than issuing a command. If you don't, he'll escalate. He'll call the police, report you missing, file a domestic dispute claim. He'll use every tool at his disposal to force you back under his control. Arya's stomach dropped. She'd known that, of course, known that not going home would only make things worse. But hearing it said aloud made the trap she was in feel even more inescapable. So what am I supposed to do? The words came out bitter, exhausted. Go home and let him hit me for staying late? Apologize for having a job that required me to work past 6? No. Dorian opened a drawer and pulled out what looked like a smartphone, except sleeker, more expensive. You go home, you apologize, you do whatever you need to do to keep yourself safe, and you keep this with you at all times. He held out the phone. Arya took it cautiously, turning it over in her hands. It was lighter than her own phone, the screen pristine. What is it? Emergency phone, fully charged, untraceable, with exactly 3 numbers programmed in. My private line, building security, and 911. If things escalate beyond your control, you press the red button on the side. It automatically calls all 3 numbers simultaneously and begins recording everything. Dorian's eyes met hers. I'll have someone at your location within 10 minutes. Building security can be there in 5. Police response time in your neighborhood averages 12 minutes, but this phone gets priority dispatch. Arya stared at the device in her palm. It was small enough to hide in her bra, lightweight enough to forget she was carrying it, and it represented something she hadn't had in 3 years. A way out. A lifeline. I can't take this, she heard herself say, even as her fingers closed around it. If Marcus finds it, then you tell him it's a work phone, emergency contact for the office. Dorian pulled a business card from his desk, different from the one he'd given her earlier, this one with the Meridian Analytics logo. I'll email your supervisor tonight to confirm that all employees working on the Thompson account have been issued emergency contact devices. It's a real policy we're implementing anyway. He'll have no reason to question it. The attention to detail was staggering. Dorian had thought through every angle, anticipated every question Marcus might ask. This wasn't improvisation. This was a system he'd built and refined through experience. How many women had he done this for? Why me? Arya asked quietly. You must see dozens of people every day in this building. Why did you notice me? Dorian was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. Because you move like Elena moved in those last months. Careful, controlled, like every step is calculated to minimize damage. He looked back at her. And because I promised myself that if I ever saw someone wearing that same exhaustion, that same quiet desperation, I wouldn't look away, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how inconvenient. Arya felt something crack open in her chest, some sealed-off part of herself that she'd locked away to survive. For 3 years, she'd made herself small, invisible, insignificant. She'd perfected the art of not being seen, and here was someone who'd looked at her and refused to look away. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered, tears streaming freely now. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You've survived 3 years of systematic abuse. Dorian's voice was firm, certain. You're stronger than you think. You just haven't had permission to be. The words settled into her bones like truth. They sat in silence for several minutes, Arya crying quietly while Dorian worked at his desk, giving her space to process. The cold pack had gone tepid against her hip, the relief fading back into constant ache. Outside the windows, the city continued its evening routine, thousands of lives playing out in the buildings below. Eventually, Arya's tears slowed. She wiped her face with tissues Dorian had silently provided, took several deep breaths, and tried to reassemble the professional mask she'd worn for so long. I should go, she said, her voice hoarse. It's almost 8. If I wait much longer, I'll have my driver take you home. Dorian was already texting on his phone. He's discreet and experienced. He'll wait outside until he sees lights go on in your apartment, then he'll leave. Marcus won't see anything except an unmarked black sedan that could belong to anyone. Dorian looked up from his phone. Richard has done this before. He knows how to be invisible. Of course he did. Because Dorian Vex had built an entire infrastructure around saving women from situations like hers. The apartment, the phone, the driver, the security. All of it carefully constructed and maintained for people he'd never meet, women whose names he'd never know. All because his sister had died alone. Thank you, Arya said, and the words felt desperately inadequate. For everything, for seeing me, for... She trailed off, unable to articulate the magnitude of what he'd offered. Don't thank me yet. Dorian stood and walked her to the door. Thank me when you're safe. When you've left and stayed left and built a life where no one raises their hand to you. He paused with his hand on the door handle. The offer stands indefinitely, Ms. Quinn. Tonight, tomorrow, next month. Whenever you're ready, that apartment is yours. Arya nodded, not trusting her voice. The drive home took 15 minutes through evening traffic. Richard, the driver, was exactly as advertised. A silent, professional presence who asked no questions and offered no commentary. The black sedan was comfortable, anonymous, forgettable. Exactly what she needed. Arya spent the drive rehearsing her apology, planning her explanation. She'd been kept late by the owner himself for an emergency review. She'd tried to call, but her phone had died. She was sorry. She knew he'd been waiting. It wouldn't happen again. The lies tasted like ash on her tongue. Her apartment building was a squat brick structure in a neighborhood that had been nice 20 years ago and was now clinging to respectability through sheer stubbornness. Arya lived on the 3rd floor, Unit 3C, in a 2-bedroom that Marcus had insisted they rent together after 6 months of dating, back when she'd thought moving in together meant love rather than control. The lights were on in her apartment. Marcus was home, waiting. You want me to walk you up? Richard's voice was gentle, understanding in a way that said he knew exactly what she was going home to. No, but thank you. Arya clutched the emergency phone in her pocket like a talisman. I'll be fine. Richard nodded, but he didn't drive away as she walked toward the building entrance. Dorian had been right. He'd wait until he saw her safely inside. The thought was both comforting and heartbreaking. Arya climbed the stairs slowly, each step bringing her closer to whatever waited behind door 3C. Her keys rattled as she pulled them out, her hands shaking with adrenaline and fear and exhaustion. The apartment smelled like beer and anger when she walked in. Marcus sat on the couch in the living room, a bottle in his hand, his eyes tracking her movement the way a predator tracked prey. The TV was on but muted, casting flickering shadows across his face. Hey, Arya said softly, closing the door behind her. I'm sorry I'm so late. Mr. Vex needed... I don't care. Marcus stood, and Arya's body went rigid on instinct. You made me look like an idiot, standing in that parking garage while some rich asshole told me what to do with my girlfriend. It wasn't like that. Don't. He crossed the room in 3 strides, and suddenly he was in her space, his size and rage filling the small entryway. Don't lie to me. You liked it, didn't you? Having someone defend you. Made you feel special. Marcus, please. His hand shot out and grabbed her jaw, fingers digging into the soft flesh of her cheeks hard enough to make her gasp. You're not special, Arya. You're mine. And the sooner you remember that, the easier this will be. The emergency phone burned in her pocket. She could press the button, could summon help that would arrive in minutes, could end this tonight. But fear was a powerful thing, and 3 years of conditioning didn't vanish in a single afternoon. "I know," Arya whispered, the words automatic. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to disrespect you." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, his grip on her jaw painful. Then he released her with a shove that sent her stumbling against the wall. "Go make dinner," he said, turning back toward the couch. "I'm hungry." Arya fled to the kitchen on shaking legs, her jaw throbbing, her hips screaming, her entire body a map of old injuries and new fears. She pulled ingredients from the refrigerator with mechanical precision, her mind disconnecting from her body the way it always did when survival required it. But this time was different. This time she had a phone in her pocket that connected her to safety. This time she had an apartment waiting for her, secured and paid for. This time she had someone who'd looked at her and seen the truth and refused to look away. The emergency phone stayed silent in her pocket through dinner, through Marcus's complaints about the overcooked chicken, through his third and fourth beers. It stayed silent as Arya cleaned the kitchen and locked herself in the bathroom to ice her jaw and catalog the new bruise forming on her shoulder. But its presence changed something fundamental. For 3 years, Arya had believed she was trapped, that there was no way out, no escape, no future beyond this cycle of violence and apology and temporary peace. Now she knew different. Now she knew that freedom was possible, that safety existed, that somewhere 47 floors above the street, a man with steel-gray eyes was waiting for her call. She just had to be brave enough to make it. Arya stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror, at the fingerprint bruises on her jaw, the exhaustion in her eyes, the woman she'd become over 3 years of systematic breaking. Then she pulled out the emergency phone and held it in her palm, feeling its weight, its promise. Not tonight, she wasn't ready yet, but soon. The thought took root in her chest like a seed, small but undeniable. Soon she would press that button. Soon she would walk into that apartment. Soon she would choose herself over fear. Marcus pounded on the bathroom door. "What are you doing in there?" "Just finishing up," Arya called back, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, took one last look at her reflection, and opened the door. To Marcus. To another night of walking on eggshells. To the life she'd accepted for 3 years. But tomorrow she was calling Dorian Vex. Tomorrow she was choosing freedom. Tomorrow, Arya Quinn was going to save herself. Tomorrow came faster than Arya expected and slower than she could bear. She woke at 5:30 to Marcus's alarm, her body aching in places she'd almost forgotten could hurt. He'd been in a mood last night, not violent, but close to it. That simmering anger that made every word feel like walking across broken glass. She'd said the wrong thing about his mother, or maybe it was about his job. The specifics blurred together after 3 years of cataloging her mistakes. He'd grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks, twisted it until she gasped, then released her with a look of disgust before going to bed. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the implicit understanding that she'd deserved it for whatever transgression he'd decided she'd committed. Arya lay still in the pre-dawn darkness, listening to Marcus shower, feeling the emergency phone pressed against her ribs where she'd hidden it in her bra. She'd slept with it there all night, terrified he'd find it if she left it in her pocket. The hard edge of plastic had left an impression in her skin, but she didn't care. It was the most comforting thing she'd touched in years. Marcus left for work at 6:15 without saying goodbye. Arya waited until she heard his truck pull out of the parking lot, counted to 100, then pulled out the phone with shaking hands. The screen lit up at her touch, showing 3 contacts like Dorian had promised. Her thumb hovered over his name for a long moment, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. The moment everything changed. If she made this call, there was no going back. Marcus would know she'd left. He'd look for her. He'd be furious in ways that made last night's anger look like mild irritation. But if she didn't make this call, she'd spend another night sleeping with a phone hidden against her ribs, another day covering bruises, another year disappearing piece by piece until there was nothing left of the woman she used to be. Arya pressed the call button. It rang once before Dorian answered. "Ms. Quinn?" His voice was steady, calm, like he'd been sitting there waiting for her call. Maybe he had been. I... Arya's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I want to take you up on your offer. The apartment. If it's still available. It's available. No hesitation, no surprise, just immediate confirmation. Are you safe right now? Yes. Marcus left for work. I'm alone. Good. Can you be ready to leave in an hour? An hour. 60 minutes to pack up 3 years of her life and walk away from the man who'd systematically broken her down into something she didn't recognize. Yes, Arya whispered. I can be ready. Richard will be there at 7:30. Pack light. Only what you absolutely need. Documents, medications, anything irreplaceable. Everything else we can replace. Dorian paused. Do you have somewhere safe to be until he arrives? A neighbor you trust? Arya almost laughed. Marcus had made sure she didn't have neighbors she trusted, didn't have friends who might ask questions, didn't have anyone who might notice when she disappeared. I'll stay in the apartment. I'll be ready when Richard gets here. Arya. It was the first time Dorian had used her first name, and something about the intimacy of it made her breath catch. If anything changes, if he comes back early, you press that red button. Don't hesitate. Don't try to handle it yourself. You call for help. Understood? Understood. Good. I'll see you soon. The line went dead, and Arya sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone in her hand. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. After 3 years of telling herself tomorrow, after 1,000 excuses and justifications and moments of weakness, she'd finally chosen herself. Now she just had to survive the next hour. Arya moved through the apartment like a ghost, pulling items from drawers and closets with mechanical precision. She had one suitcase, a battered gray thing she'd brought when she moved in, back when she'd still believed Marcus was the love of her life rather than her slow destruction. It felt fitting to leave with the same bag she'd arrived with, as if the last 3 years could be contained and left behind. Documents first. Birth certificate, social security card, passport, bank statements. She kept them in a locked box in the back of her closet, hidden behind winter coats Marcus never touched. The key was taped to the underside of her jewelry box, a hiding place that had seemed clever at the time, but now just felt sad. Medications next. Not much. An inhaler for asthma she rarely used, birth control Marcus had insisted she take. The pills made her nauseous, but he'd said he wasn't ready for kids, and what Marcus said was law. Arya dumped the birth control pills in the bathroom trash with a vindictive satisfaction that surprised her. Clothes. Not many. Marcus had opinions about what she wore, and over time her wardrobe had shrunk to things he approved of. Conservative blouses, slacks instead of jeans. Nothing that drew attention. Nothing that made other men look at her. She packed them anyway, even though part of her wanted to leave every piece of clothing behind as evidence of what he'd turned her into. Personal items were harder. There were photos from before, from when she'd still smiled in pictures, when her eyes had still held light. Arya hesitated over a frame showing her and her mother at her college graduation, then tucked it carefully between layers of clothing. Some memories were worth saving, even if they hurt to look at. By 7:20, her entire life was packed into one suitcase and a backpack. 3 years of existence, reduced to 40 pounds of possessions. It should have felt liberating. Instead, it felt like evidence of how thoroughly she'd been erased. Arya stood in the living room, looking at the space that had been her prison. The couch where Marcus watched TV every night, beer in hand, deciding her worth based on how dinner tasted. The kitchen where she'd learned to cook exactly how he liked, no variations, no creativity. The bedroom where she'd learned to be silent, still, whatever he needed her to be. She felt nothing looking at it. No nostalgia, no regret, just a vast, echoing emptiness where emotion should have been. Her phone buzzed, her actual phone, not the emergency one. A text from Marcus. Forgot my lunch. Bring it to the warehouse at noon. Arya stared at the message, her heart rate spiking. He thought she was still here, still his, still willing to drop everything to serve his needs. She deleted the text without responding. At 7:28, Arya watched from the window as the black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Richard emerged, dressed in a dark suit that made him look more like a bodyguard than a driver. He moved with the careful awareness of someone trained to notice threats, his eyes scanning the parking lot and building entrances before he headed toward her building. Arya grabbed her suitcase and backpack, took one last look at the apartment, and walked out the door. She didn't look back. Richard met her at the bottom of the stairs, taking her suitcase without a word. His expression was kind but professional, offering no pity and no judgment, just quiet competence. Ms.
Quinn, he said, holding the car door open. Mr. Vex is waiting at the apartment.
Arya slid into the back seat, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them in her lap to keep them still. This was real. This was actually happening. She was leaving. The drive downtown took 20 minutes through morning traffic. Arya watched the city pass outside the window, familiar streets taking her somewhere completely foreign. The apartment building was in the financial district, surrounded by other high-rises and expensive restaurants. The kind of neighborhood where a woman in a business suit wouldn't draw attention, where anonymity was built into the architecture. Richard pulled into an underground parking garage and used a keycard to access a private elevator. They rode up in silence, Arya's reflection staring back at her from the polished doors. She looked pale, exhausted, terrified. She looked exactly how she felt. The elevator opened directly into the apartment. Arya stepped out and felt her breath catch. It was beautiful in the way safe places were beautiful. Not ornate or showy, but solid and secure. Hardwood floors gleamed under recessed lighting. Large windows offered views of the city but were tinted for privacy. The furniture was new, tasteful, obviously expensive, but not ostentatious. The kitchen was modern and fully stocked. There were 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a living space that felt more like a home than anywhere Arya had lived in 3 years. Dorian stood near the windows, his hands in his pockets, watching her take it all in. He'd changed from his usual suit into dark slacks and a gray shirt, the most casual she'd seen him. It made him look younger, more human, though his eyes were still that same penetrating steel. "What do you think?" he asked quietly. Arya couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She walked slowly through the space, touching surfaces like she needed proof they were real. The couch was soft under her fingers. The kitchen counter was cool marble. Everything smelled new and clean and safe. "It's too much," she finally managed, her voice breaking. I don't deserve—" "Stop." Dorian's voice was firm, but not harsh. "You deserve safety. You deserve a space where you can sleep without fear. You deserve to live, Arya. Everything else is just logistics." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "Why are you doing this? Really? I need to understand." Dorian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old grief. Because Elena's boyfriend seemed like a good guy at first, too. Because by the time I noticed something was wrong, she was so isolated she couldn't hear me when I tried to help. Because I was too slow, too cautious, too willing to give her space when what she needed was someone to break down the door. He met Arya's eyes. "I won't make that mistake again." The rawness in his voice broke something in Arya's chest. She'd spent 3 years believing she was alone, that no one cared enough to notice her pain. But here was a man who'd built an entire infrastructure of salvation because he'd failed to save the one person who mattered most. "I don't know how to do this," Arya whispered. "I don't know how to be free." "You learn." Dorian moved to the kitchen island where a folder lay waiting. "One step at a time, starting with these." He opened the folder to reveal paperwork, restraining order applications, police report templates, victim advocacy resources. Everything organized, labeled, ready to be filed. "You don't have to do any of this today," Dorian said. "Or tomorrow. Or next week. You take whatever time you need to feel stable, to feel safe. But when you're ready to fight back legally, these are your tools." Arya stared at the documents, her mind reeling. What if he finds me? What if he comes here? He won't. Dorian's certainty was absolute. This building has security protocols specifically designed for situations like yours. Your name isn't on the lease. It's held by a property trust. The concierge has your photo and Marcus's photo with instructions to deny him access and call police if he tries to enter. There are cameras on every floor and security can be at your door in under 3 minutes. But he knows I worked at Vex Tower. He'll look for me there. Which is why you're taking a leave of absence from Meridian Analytics, effective immediately. As far as anyone knows, you've left the city for a family emergency. Your supervisor has been briefed by me personally on the need for confidentiality. If Marcus calls asking about you, she'll tell him you're no longer employed there and she has no forwarding information. Arya felt dizzy with the speed of it all. Dorian had thought of everything, planned for every contingency. The level of care and attention he'd put into her safety was overwhelming. What about my things? The rest of my stuff at the apartment? Already handled. Richard appeared from one of the bedrooms, his expression apologetic. With your permission, Ms. Quinn, Mr. Vex would like to send a crew to retrieve your remaining possessions this afternoon. We have a locksmith who can get us in, and movers who are experienced in these situations. We'll take photos of everything before we remove it, pack it carefully, and bring it here. Anything you don't want, we'll store or dispose of according to your wishes. It was too much, too organized, too competent. Arya felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life, some alternate reality where people actually helped instead of hurt. When Marcus gets home and finds me gone, Arya started, her voice shaking. He'll be angry, Dorian finished. He'll call, he'll text, he'll show up at the old apartment, all of which is expected. He pulled out another phone, this one a regular smartphone. This is your new phone, new number, registered to the property trust. Your old phone stays here, turned off. If Marcus tries to track you through it, he'll find this apartment, which is already secured. Your new number goes to people you trust, your family, your friends, your new employer when you're ready for one. New employer? When you're ready, Dorian repeated. I have connections throughout the city. When you're stable enough to work again, I'll help you find something. But there's no rush. The apartment is yours for as long as you need it. Arya sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. This was real. This was actually happening. She'd left Marcus. She was safe. She was free. I need to call my mother, she said suddenly. She'll worry when she can't reach me. Dorian handed her the new phone. Take all the time you need. Richard and I will give you privacy. They disappeared into the second bedroom, leaving Arya alone in her new living room. She stared at the phone in her hand, trying to remember the last time she'd called her mother without Marcus listening in, without having to watch every word. 3 years. It had been 3 years since she'd had a private conversation with anyone. Her mother answered on the second ring. Hello? Mom, it's me. There was a pause, confusion in her mother's voice. Arya, is this a new number? Where are you calling from? Arya's voice broke. Mom, I left him. I left Marcus. I'm safe, but I need you to know that if he calls you asking where I am, you don't know anything. You haven't heard from me. Please. Another pause, longer this time. Then her mother's voice came back, thick with tears. Oh, baby, thank God. I've been so worried. He wouldn't let me talk to you alone, and I could hear it in your voice that something was wrong, but I didn't know how to help. It's okay. Arya was crying now too, great heaving sobs that shook her entire body. It's okay. I'm out. I'm somewhere safe. I can't tell you where, not yet, but I'm safe. Are you hurt? Do you need a doctor? I'm okay. Bruised, but okay. Mom, I need you to promise me something. If Marcus shows up at your house, you call the police. Don't talk to him. Don't try to reason with him. Just call the police. I will, I promise. Her mother was sobbing openly now. Arya, I'm so sorry. I should have done more. I should have made you leave. You couldn't have made me leave until I was ready. But I'm ready now. Arya wiped her eyes, taking a shuddering breath. I have help. Good people helping me. I'm going to file a restraining order. I'm going to make sure he can't find me. Whatever you need. Anything. Do you need money? No, that's taken care of. Arya looked around the apartment, at the life Dorian had built for her in the span of a single day. I just needed to hear your voice, to know that you're on my side. Always, always, baby. You're my daughter. I'm always on your side. They talked for another 20 minutes, Arya's mother crying and apologizing and promising support. By the time Arya hung up, she felt lighter somehow. Like telling the truth to someone who loved her had lifted a weight she'd been carrying for years. Dorian and Richard emerged from the bedroom when they heard the call end. How are you doing? Dorian asked, his eyes searching her face. Arya stopped, considering the question honestly. I'm terrified and relieved, and so angry I can barely breathe, and grateful, all of it at once. That's normal. Dorian sat in the chair across from her, his posture open but not invasive. You've just done the hardest thing you'll ever do. Everything from here gets easier. Does it? Arya looked at him, needing honesty. Or am I just trading one nightmare for another? What happens when Marcus figures out where I am? What happens when the restraining order isn't enough? Then we escalate. Dorian's voice was hard as stone. We document every violation. We press charges. We make his life so legally complicated that he has no time or energy to focus on you. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. Arya, I need you to understand something. Marcus's power over you came from isolation, from making you believe you had no options. But you're not isolated anymore. You have resources. You have protection. You have legal recourse. And most importantly, you have people who will believe you and fight for you. The words sank in slowly, like water soaking into parched earth. What do I do now? Arya asked. Today, right now. What am I supposed to do? Whatever you need to do. Dorian stood, moving toward the door. Rest, cry, sleep, scream. Whatever helps you process what you've just done. Richard and I will handle everything else. The movers will come this afternoon, and someone will be here to let them in. You don't have to do anything except exist in this space and remember what safety feels like. He was almost to the door when Arya's voice stopped him. Dorian. He turned back and she saw surprise flicker across his face at the use of his first name. Thank you, Arya said simply, for seeing me, for not looking away, for this. She gestured at the apartment. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. You don't repay me. Dorian's expression was fierce. You live. You heal. You become the person you were before he broke you down. That's how you repay me, by proving that this was worth it, that you were worth saving. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Arya alone in her new apartment with windows that locked from the inside and rooms where no one would hurt her. She sat on the couch for a long time, letting the silence settle around her like a blanket. Outside the windows, the city moved through its morning routine. Thousands of people living their lives, unaware that Arya Quinn had just chosen to reclaim hers. Eventually, she got up and walked through the apartment, opening closets and cabinets, learning the geography of her new life. The main bedroom had a queen-size bed with fresh sheets still in packages. The bathroom had towels, toiletries, everything she might need. The kitchen was fully stocked with food she didn't have to cook for anyone but herself. It was too much. It was exactly enough. Arya unpacked her suitcase slowly, hanging her clothes in a closet that was hers alone, placing her documents in drawers that Marcus would never open. The photo of her and her mother went on the nightstand, a reminder of who she'd been before fear became her constant companion. By noon, her phone, her old phone, was buzzing constantly. Arya watched from across the room as text after text came in, all from Marcus. Where are you? Answer me. I know you're seeing this. You're making a big mistake. Come home now and we can forget this happened. Don't make me come find you. You think you can just leave me? You're nothing without me. I'll find you. You know I will. The messages escalated from confusion to anger to threats, exactly as Dorian had predicted. Arya felt her hand shaking as she watched them accumulate, felt the old fear trying to reassert itself. Then she turned off the phone and put it in a drawer. She didn't have to read those messages anymore, didn't have to respond, didn't have to manage Marcus's emotions or apologize for existing. She was free. The realization hit her all at once, and Arya sank to the floor, her back against the bed, and finally let herself break. 3 years of holding it together, of surviving, of pretending she was fine, came pouring out in great wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for the woman she'd been before Marcus. She cried for every bruise, every lie, every moment she'd made herself small. She cried for Elena, who'd never gotten this chance. She cried for her mother's voice on the phone, thick with relief and regret. And she cried for herself, for the courage it had taken to make one phone call and change everything. By the time the tears stopped, the sun had moved across the sky. Arya pulled herself off the floor, washed her face in her new bathroom, and looked at her reflection in the mirror. She looked exactly the same. Pale, exhausted, bruised. But something in her eyes was different, something that hadn't been there yesterday. Hope. It was small, fragile, barely more than a spark. But it was there, and Arya was going to protect it the way Dorian had protected her, fiercely, completely, without hesitation. Her new phone rang, and she answered without checking the caller ID. "Miss Quinn, this is Detective Sarah Chen from the Victim Advocacy Unit." The voice was professional but warm. "Mr. Vex asked me to reach out to you regarding filing a restraining order. I understand this is a difficult time, but I wanted you to know that I'm available whenever you're ready to talk. No pressure, no timeline, just resources when you need them." Arya closed her eyes, feeling the net of protection Dorian had woven around her. Detective Chen, building security, Richard, legal documents, a safe apartment, people who believed her. "Thank you," Arya said. "Can we schedule something for tomorrow? I think I'm ready to start fighting back." "Absolutely. I'll send you my office address. We'll take your statement, photograph any injuries, and begin the paperwork." "You're doing the right thing, Ms. Quinn. It takes incredible strength to get to this point." After they hung up, Arya walked to the windows and looked out at the city spread below. Somewhere out there, Marcus was looking for her, calling her friends, the few he'd allowed her to keep, driving past her mother's house, getting angrier with every dead end. Let him look. Let him rage. Let him realize that she was beyond his reach now. Arya Quinn had spent 3 years disappearing. Now she was going to spend however long it took becoming visible again, to herself, to the world, to the life she deserved. And nothing Marcus did would ever be enough to pull her back into the darkness. She was done being afraid. She was done being small. She was done. The first 48 hours were the hardest. Arya spent them learning how to exist in a space where nobody hurt her, and the adjustment was more jarring than she'd expected. She woke in the night expecting Marcus's weight on the mattress, his breathing in the darkness, the threat of his mood hovering like a storm cloud. Instead, she found silence, emptiness, safety that felt almost like abandonment. Freedom, she was learning, could feel terrifyingly like loneliness when you'd been conditioned to equate love with control. On the second morning, she met with Detective Chen. The Advocacy Center was in a nondescript building downtown, designed to look like any other office space so victims wouldn't feel exposed coming and going. Detective Chen turned out to be a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the calm competence of someone who'd heard every story and still chose to believe. "Thank you for coming," Chen said, gesturing Arya into a private interview room. The space was deliberately non-threatening, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a box of tissues already on the table. "I know this isn't easy. We're going to take this at whatever pace you need." Arya sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She'd dressed carefully that morning, choosing clothes that covered her bruises. Then she'd stopped halfway through getting ready and changed into a short-sleeved blouse instead. She was done hiding the evidence. "Where do we start?" Arya asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "With documentation." Chen pulled out a camera and a form. "I'm going to photograph your injuries, with your permission. Every bruise, every mark, every piece of physical evidence. These photos become part of your legal record and can be used to support a restraining order, or if you choose to press charges, in criminal prosecution." The clinical nature of it should have felt dehumanizing. Instead, Arya felt something close to relief. Here was someone who believed her enough to create a permanent record, someone who saw value in documenting what Marcus had done. "Okay," Arya said quietly. "I'm ready." The photography session took an hour. Chen was methodical and professional, having Arya remove her blouse to photograph the fingerprint bruises on her upper arms, the yellowing contusions on her ribs. She photographed Arya's hip where the counter had left an imprint, her jaw where Marcus had grabbed her 2 nights ago, her wrist that still bore the marks from his twisting grip. Each click of the camera felt like evidence of her survival. "These will heal," Chen said gently, reviewing the images. "But the photographs won't. This is your proof, Arya. No one can take this away from you or tell you it wasn't that bad." After the photography came the interview. Chen asked questions in a calm, steady voice, typing Arya's answers into a laptop. How long had the abuse been occurring? What forms had it taken? Were there witnesses? Had she ever sought medical attention? Arya answered as honestly as she could, her voice cracking only occasionally. She told Chen about the escalation, how it had started with criticism and isolation, progressed to pushing and shoving, eventually becoming systematic violence. She described the pattern: Marcus's anger building over days, the inevitable explosion, the tearful apologies and promises to change that lasted just long enough for her to believe them. "Did he ever threaten to kill you?" Chen asked. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. Arya was quiet for a long moment, remembering. "Not directly. But there was one time, about 6 months ago, when he had his hands around my throat, and he squeezed until I couldn't breathe, until I was seeing spots. Then he let go and walked away like nothing happened." She met Chen's eyes. "I thought I was going to die, and I think he wanted me to think that." Chen nodded slowly, typing. "That's strangulation, which is a felony in this state. It's also the strongest predictor of eventual homicide in domestic violence situations. The fact that he did that and you're still alive is significant." The words settled in Arya's chest like ice. She'd known on some level that Marcus was capable of killing her, but hearing it stated so baldly by someone with training and experience made it impossible to dismiss as paranoia. "What happens now?" Arya asked. "Now we file for an emergency protective order. Based on your statement and these photographs, a judge will almost certainly grant it. The order will prohibit Marcus from contacting you, coming within 500 feet of you, or entering your residence. If he violates it, he can be arrested immediately." Chen pulled out paperwork. "The emergency order lasts 10 days. During that time, we'll schedule a hearing for a permanent restraining order, which can last up to a year and be renewed indefinitely." Arya signed the documents with shaking hands, her signature looking unfamiliar on the pages. 3 years ago, she'd signed a lease with Marcus, believing she was building a future. Now she was signing papers to keep him away from her, building a different kind of future entirely. "One more thing," Chen said as they finished. "Marcus will be served with this order, probably within the next 24 hours. When that happens, he's going to escalate. He's going to feel like his control is slipping, and he'll do whatever he can to reassert it. You need to be prepared for that." "I'm staying somewhere safe," Arya said. "Somewhere he can't find me." "Good. Keep it that way." Chen handed Arya a card with crisis hotline numbers and her direct line. "And Arya, you did the right thing coming here. A lot of women don't make it this far. The fact that you did means you're strong enough to survive whatever comes next." Arya left the advocacy center feeling hollowed out and strangely powerful at the same time. She'd spoken the truth aloud to someone who believed her. She'd documented years of abuse in photographs and testimony. She'd taken legal action to protect herself. Marcus couldn't touch her anymore without consequences. The protective order was granted that afternoon. Chen called to confirm it, her voice carrying satisfaction. "The judge looked at your photos and didn't even hesitate. The order is active immediately. Marcus will be served tomorrow morning at his workplace." Arya thanked her and hung up, then sat on her couch staring at nothing. Tomorrow morning, Marcus would be handed papers that legally prohibited him from contacting her. He'd read about the photographs, the testimony, the accusations she'd made official and permanent. He was going to lose his mind. Her new phone rang an hour later. Dorian's name appeared on the screen. "How did it go?" he asked without preamble. "The order was granted. He'll be served tomorrow." "Good. How are you holding up?" Arya laughed, a brittle sound. "I feel like I'm waiting for a bomb to go off. Like I've just lit the fuse and now I'm standing here watching it burn down, knowing the explosion is coming, but not knowing exactly when." That's accurate. Dorian's honesty was almost comforting in its starkness. "The next week will be volatile. He'll try everything. Calls, texts, showing up at places he thinks you'll be. He might try to turn people against you, claim you're lying or exaggerating. He might even file counterclaims, try to paint himself as the victim. So what do I do? You document everything, every text, every call, every attempt at contact. You don't respond, don't engage, don't give him any opening, and you let the legal system do what it's designed to do. What if it's not enough?" The question came out smaller than Arya intended. "What if he finds me anyway?" There was a pause on the line. When Dorian spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made Arya sit up straighter. "Then he'll have to go through me first. And I promise you, Arya, that's not a fight he'll win." The certainty in his voice should have been alarming. This man who'd inserted himself into her life, who'd taken on her protection like a personal mission. But Arya was too tired to be suspicious of kindness anymore. She needed allies, and Dorian had proven himself to be exactly that. "Thank you," she said quietly. For everything. I don't know what I would have done without... You would have found another way, Dorian interrupted. Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as safely, but you would have found it. You're stronger than you think, Arya. I just provided resources. The courage to use them came from you. After they hung up, Arya made dinner in her new kitchen, pasta with vegetables, nothing fancy. She ate alone at the counter, and the silence felt less oppressive than it had the night before. She was starting to remember what peace felt like, what it meant to make choices based on what she wanted rather than what would keep someone else calm. Marcus was served with the protective order the next morning at 9:15. Arya knew the exact time because her old phone, still in the drawer, still turned off, suddenly started buzzing with such intensity that she could hear it through the wood. She stared at the drawer for a long moment, her heart racing, then pulled it out and turned it on. 63 missed calls, 47 text messages, all from Marcus, all within the last 30 minutes. Arya took screenshots of everything, sent them to Detective Chen's email, then turned the phone off again. Evidence collected, responsibility discharged. She didn't need to read the messages to know what they said. Rage, manipulation, threats, promises. The same cycle he'd run 1,000 times before. But this time, she wasn't there to absorb it. Her new phone rang, an unknown number. Arya let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with her finger hovering over the delete button. Arya, it's Marcus. His voice was tight with controlled fury. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this restraining order is bullshit. Those photos are from when you fell, remember? You fell. And now you're making me look like some kind of monster to the police. You need to call them and tell them the truth. Tell them you made a mistake. Call me back. We need to fix this. She saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Chen. The calls kept coming, from different numbers, from blocked numbers, from phones that belonged to Marcus's friends. Arya didn't answer any of them. Each one went to voicemail. Each voicemail was saved and documented, each piece of evidence added to the growing file. On the third day after the order was served, Arya's mother called. He came to my house, her mother said without greeting, her voice shaking. Marcus showed up an hour ago demanding to know where you are. I told him I didn't know, and he started yelling, said you'd poisoned me against him, that you were lying about everything. I called the police like you told me to. They came and made him leave, but Arya, he was so angry. I've never seen him like that. I'm sorry, Mom. Arya's hands were trembling. I'm so sorry he dragged you into this. Don't you dare apologize. I'm fine. The police documented everything, and they told him that showing up here again would be a violation of the restraining order since I'm your family. Her mother's voice cracked. I just needed to hear your voice to know you're really okay. I'm okay. I'm safe. I promise. That man who's helping you, Mr. Vex, is he trustworthy? Arya thought about Dorian, about the apartment and the security and the careful network of protection he'd built. Yes, he's trustworthy. Good. Because I've been doing some research, honey, and I found something you need to know. Her mother took a deep breath. Marcus has a record from before you met him. Domestic violence charges from an ex-girlfriend 7 years ago. The charges were dropped, but the arrest is still on file. The information hit Arya like a physical blow. He told me he'd never been in trouble with the law. Of course he did. Men like him always lie. Her mother's voice hardened. I'm sending you the information I found. Give it to your detective. It establishes a pattern. It proves this isn't the first time he's done this. After her mother hung up, Arya sat with the revelation. Marcus had done this before, had hurt someone before. And whoever that woman was, she'd been brave enough to press charges even though they hadn't stuck. Arya pulled up Detective Chen's number. I need to tell you something, Arya said when Chen answered. Marcus has a prior domestic violence arrest from 7 years ago, different victim. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. What was the victim's name? I don't know. My mother found the arrest record, but not the full case file. Let me look into it. If we can locate the prior victim and she's willing to testify about a pattern of behavior, it significantly strengthens your case. Chen paused. Arya, this is good. This means you weren't wrong about him. Your instincts were right. The validation shouldn't have mattered so much, but it did. For 3 years, Marcus had convinced her that she was the problem. Too sensitive, too dramatic, too everything. Learning that he'd abused someone else confirmed what Arya had known in her bones, but been too beaten down to trust. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't overreacting. Marcus was dangerous, and she'd been right to run. The next escalation came on day 5. Arya was walking back from a coffee shop 2 blocks from her apartment, her first solo venture outside since leaving Marcus, when she saw him. He was standing across the street, leaning against a building, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. He shouldn't have known where she was, shouldn't have been able to find her. The apartment was registered to a property trust. Her name was nowhere on public records. She'd been so careful. But there he was, and the look on his face promised violence. Arya's hand went to her pocket, to the emergency phone that was always there. Her fingers found the red button, and she pressed it without hesitation. Marcus started walking toward her, crossing the street with long strides, his hands clenched into fists. Arya backed up, her mind racing through options. Run? Scream? Stand her ground? Arya! Marcus's voice carried across the street. We need to talk. Stay away from me. Arya's voice came out stronger than she felt. You're violating the restraining order. I don't care about that bullshit order. Marcus was 10 feet away now, close enough that Arya could see the rage in his eyes. You don't get to just leave. You don't get to destroy my life with lies and then hide like a coward. A black sedan turned the corner, moving fast. Richard emerged before it had fully stopped, placing himself between Arya and Marcus with the practiced ease of someone trained in protection. He was taller than Marcus, broader, and he carried himself like violence was a tool he knew how to use efficiently. Sir, you need to step back, Richard said, his voice calm but commanding. You're in violation of a protective order. The police have already been called. Who the hell are you? Marcus tried to move around Richard, but the larger man shifted smoothly, maintaining the barrier. This is between me and my girlfriend. I'm not your girlfriend, Arya's voice cracked. I haven't been for 3 days, ever since I found the courage to leave you. Marcus's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful... He lunged forward, trying to get past Richard. What happened next was so fast, Arya almost missed it. Richard caught Marcus's arm, twisted, and had him face first against a parked car in seconds. Marcus struggled, cursing, but Richard held him easily, his knee in Marcus's back. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. You're making this worse for yourself, Richard said calmly. Every second you struggle is another charge they'll add. Violating a protective order, assault, disorderly conduct. You want to keep going? Marcus went still, his face pressed against the car hood, his eyes fixed on Arya with such hatred that she took an involuntary step back. 2 police cars pulled up, officers emerging with hands on their weapons. Richard identified himself and explained the situation in crisp, professional terms. The officers took over restraining Marcus, pulling him upright and handcuffing him while reading him his rights. Ms. Quinn? One of the officers approached Arya, his expression sympathetic. Are you the protected party in the order against this individual? Yes. Arya's voice was shaking now, adrenaline crashing through her system. He was waiting for me. I don't know how he found me, but he was waiting. We'll need your statement, and we'll be arresting him for violation of the protective order. This is a criminal offense. He'll spend at least tonight in jail, possibly longer, depending on the judge. Arya watched as they loaded Marcus into the back of a patrol car, his face visible through the window, still twisted with rage. He mouthed something at her. She couldn't hear it, but she could read his lips well enough after 3 years. You'll pay for this. The threat should have terrified her. Instead, Arya felt a strange calm settling over her. Marcus was in handcuffs. Marcus was being arrested. Marcus was finally facing consequences for his actions. Another car pulled up, this one even more expensive than Richard's sedan. Dorian emerged, his expression thunderous, his eyes immediately finding Arya. Are you hurt? He asked, his hands hovering near her arms but not quite touching, giving her space. No, I'm okay. Richard got here so fast and the police... Arya's composure cracked, and suddenly she was crying, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. He found me. I don't know how, but he found me. We'll figure it out. Dorian's voice was steel-wrapped in concern. and we'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Richard, review the security footage from every camera between here and the apartment. I want to know how long he was following her." "Already on it, sir." Arya gave her statement to the police, her voice steadier now. She explained about the protective order, about pressing the emergency button, about Richard's intervention. The officers were thorough, taking photos of Marcus's position across the street, documenting the timeline, collecting evidence. By the time they finished, Marcus was gone, transported downtown for processing. "He'll be held for at least 48 hours, the lead officer told Arya. And given that this is a clear violation of a protective order, the DA will almost certainly file additional charges. This works in your favor, Ms. Quinn. It proves he's a threat." Dorian drove her back to the apartment himself, Richard following in the sedan. The elevator ride up was silent, but Dorian's presence was solid, grounding. Arya focused on breathing, on processing what had just happened. Marcus had found her, had waited for her, had been ready to hurt her, and she'd survived it. Inside the apartment, Dorian pulled out his phone and made a series of calls. Arya sat on the couch, watching him work with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this before. He spoke to building security, to his IT department, to someone who sounded like a private investigator. "How did he find you?" Dorian asked after hanging up from the last call. "I don't know. I've been so careful." "Did you use a credit card anywhere near here? Your old one registered to your old address?" Arya thought back. "No, I haven't used any of my old cards since I left." What about your phone? Did you bring your old phone with you when you went to the coffee shop?" "No, it's in the drawer where—" Arya stopped, her blood running cold. "Oh, God. My car. I drove my car to the coffee shop. Marcus knows my license plate." "He tracked your car," Dorian said, his voice flat. "Probably using one of those cheap GPS trackers you can buy online. 5 minutes with access to your vehicle, and he'd know everywhere you went." Arya felt sick. She'd been so focused on hiding her apartment location, on securing her phone and documents, that she hadn't thought about her car. And Marcus had always insisted on having a spare key to her vehicle, claiming it was for emergencies, claiming he needed access. "The car is registered in my name," Arya said quietly. "It's parked in the building garage. If he's tracking it, then we get rid of the tracker and the car." Dorian was already texting. "I'm having it towed to a secure location tonight. My people will sweep it for tracking devices and disable anything they find. Then we'll sell it and get you a different vehicle registered to the property trust." "I can't afford—" "You're not paying for it." Dorian's tone left no room for argument. "This is part of keeping you safe. Non-negotiable." Arya wanted to argue, to insist she couldn't accept more help, more money, more resources. But she was too exhausted to fight. And deep down, she knew he was right. Her safety was more important than her pride. "Okay," she said simply. Dorian's expression softened. "You did everything right today, Arya. You pressed the emergency button. You called for help. You survived. That's what matters." "I was so scared," Arya whispered. "When I saw him standing there, I thought—" "I know." Dorian sat down across from her, his posture more relaxed but his eyes still sharp. "But fear didn't stop you from acting. That's the difference between where you were 3 days ago and where you are now. 3 days ago, fear would have paralyzed you. Today, fear made you fight back." The words settled into Arya's chest, taking root. He was right. 3 days ago, she would have gone to Marcus, apologized, tried to calm him down. Today, she'd called for help and let other people protect her. She was learning how to save herself. Detective Chen called an hour later. "I heard about the incident. Are you okay?" "I'm fine. They arrested him." "Good. This actually helps your case significantly. The DA is filing charges for violation of a protective order, attempted assault, and stalking. Combined with your initial complaint and the prior arrest record I found, we're building a solid case. Marcus is looking at serious jail time if convicted." "You found his prior victim?" Arya asked. "I did. Her name is Jennifer Wallace. She was his girlfriend 7 years ago, and according to the case file, the abuse was extensive. She pressed charges, but he convinced her to drop them before trial. Classic manipulation." Chen paused. "I reached out to her through proper channels. She's willing to speak with you if you're interested. No pressure, but hearing from someone who survived him might be valuable for both of you." Arya considered it,
There was comfort in knowing she wasn't alone, that someone else had escaped Marcus and lived to tell about it. Yes, I'd like that. I'll arrange it. In the meantime, Marcus will be arraigned tomorrow morning. The judge will decide on bail. Given the protective order violation, I'm hoping he'll be held without bail, but we need to be prepared for the possibility that he gets out.
If he gets out, what happens?
Then we increase your security, tighten the restrictions on the protective order, and document every single thing he does. Eventually, he'll violate again, they always do, and we'll have enough to put him away for a long time. Chen's voice was steady, certain. This is a marathon, Arya, not a sprint. But you're winning. Keep remembering that. That night, Arya couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in her mind. Marcus's rage, Richard's intervention, the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. She'd faced Marcus and survived. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. Because if he'd found her once, he could find her again. If he got out on bail, he'd be even more determined, even more dangerous. But Arya wasn't the same woman who'd lived with him for 3 years. That woman had been systematically broken down, isolated, convinced she was worthless without him. This woman knew her worth. This woman had people fighting for her. This woman had pressed a button and watched help arrive in minutes. This woman was learning how to be free. And no matter how many times Marcus tried to drag her back into darkness, Arya was going to keep fighting toward the light. Because she'd tasted freedom now, and there was no going back. Marcus made bail. The news came through Detective Chen's call at 6 in the morning, 3 days after his arrest. Arya was already awake, staring at the ceiling and counting the hours until she knew he'd be behind bars. The judge had set bail at $50,000, and somehow Marcus had scraped together the 10% needed to walk free pending trial. He's out, Chen said without preamble. Released an hour ago with strict conditions. No contact with you, no leaving the county, electronic monitoring. But Arya, you need to be extra vigilant. Men like Marcus don't respond well to being caged, even temporarily. Arya sat up in bed, her heart already racing. What do I do? Exactly what you've been doing. Stay alert. Document everything. Don't go anywhere alone. The electronic monitor means we'll know if he comes within the restricted distance of you, but technology isn't perfect. Trust your instincts. After hanging up, Arya sat in the growing morning light, feeling the fragile safety she'd built over the past week crack under the weight of Marcus's freedom. He was out there somewhere, angry and humiliated, knowing she'd been the one to put him in handcuffs. She called Dorian. I heard, he said, his voice rough like he'd just woken up. Richard is already on his way to you. He'll stay close today. I can't live like this forever, Arya said, her voice breaking. I can't spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to show up. You won't have to. The trial is in 6 weeks. If we can hold strong until then, if we can document every violation and build an airtight case, Marcus goes to prison for a long time, and you get to live your life. 6 weeks felt like an eternity. The meeting with Jennifer Wallace happened 3 days later, arranged by Detective Chen in a private room at the Advocacy Center. Arya arrived early, her nerves jangling, unsure what to expect from a woman who'd survived Marcus 7 years before she had. Jennifer turned out to be 34, with auburn hair and the kind of carefully maintained composure that Arya recognized instantly. It was the armor survivors wore, the shield between their trauma and the world. Thank you for meeting me, Arya said as they sat down across from each other, coffee cups between them like a buffer. Thank you for pressing charges, Jennifer replied, her voice steady, but her hands wrapped tightly around her cup. When Detective Chen told me someone else had finally reported him, I felt... She paused, searching for words. Relief. And guilt that I'd been relieved. Like maybe if I hadn't dropped the charges 7 years ago, you wouldn't have had to go through this. That's not your fault, Arya said firmly. I know what it's like, the pressure to drop charges, the promises that he'll change, the fear of what happens if you follow through. Jennifer's eyes met hers, and in that moment, they understood each other completely. They were members of the same terrible club, survivors of the same man's violence. He told me I was the love of his life, Jennifer said quietly, that he'd never felt this way about anyone before, that his anger was just because he cared so much. She laughed bitterly. I believed him. For 2 years I believed every word. What made you leave?
He choked me until I passed out. I woke up on the floor with him standing over me, looking almost surprised that I was breathing. That's when I knew. If I stayed, he would kill me eventually. Maybe not on purpose, but it would happen. Jennifer took a shaky breath. So I ran, I pressed charges, and then he showed up at my work crying, begging, promising he'd get help. And I was so tired of being afraid that I believed him. I dropped the charges. Did he get help? For about 3 weeks. Then the anger came back. But by then I was ready. I had a plan. I left the state, changed my number, rebuilt my entire life somewhere he couldn't find me. Jennifer's expression hardened, and I promised myself that if I ever got the chance to help put him away, I would take it. So when Detective Chen called, I said yes immediately. I'll testify at his trial, Arya. I'll tell them everything he did to me. You're not fighting him alone. The words hit Arya like a wave of relief so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. She wasn't alone. This woman who'd escaped the same monster was willing to stand up in court and prove that Marcus's violence wasn't a one-time mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a pattern, a choice he made again and again. Why did you agree to meet with me? Arya asked. You could have just testified without this. Jennifer reached across the table and took Arya's hand. Because 7 years ago, I needed someone to tell me it wasn't my fault, that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or dramatic, that what he did to me was real and wrong and I had every right to run. I didn't have that person, but you can have me. They talked for 2 hours, comparing stories, finding the eerie similarities in Marcus's behavior, the same pattern of isolation, the same escalation from criticism to violence, the same tearful apologies followed by renewed abuse. It was like Marcus had been reading from a script, performing the same manipulation on 2 different women separated by years. He's not going to stop, Jennifer said as they stood to leave. Even if he goes to prison, even if he serves his full sentence, men like Marcus don't change. They just get better at hiding what they are. Then I'll spend the rest of my life hiding from him? No, Jennifer's voice was fierce. You live your life as loudly as possible. You take up space. You refuse to be diminished by what he did to you. That's how you win, by becoming more yourself than he could ever allow you to be. The words stayed with Arya as she left the center, Richard trailing her at a respectful distance. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago, confident, ambitious, full of plans. Then she thought about the woman she'd become under Marcus's control, small, silent, constantly afraid. And she thought about who she wanted to be now. The answer came more easily than expected. Herself, but stronger. Herself, but unafraid. Herself, but free. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Marcus. According to his electronic monitoring, he was staying at his apartment, going to work, following every condition of his bail. But Arya couldn't shake the feeling that he was planning something. Marcus didn't accept defeat gracefully. He was biding his time, waiting for the right moment. She spent those weeks rebuilding pieces of her life. She started therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma. She reconnected with friends she'd lost touch with during her relationship with Marcus, explaining in careful words where she'd been and why she'd disappeared. Most of them understood. Some didn't. Arya learned to accept both responses. She also started looking for work. Dorian had offered to help her find a position, but Arya wanted to do it herself, to prove she could stand on her own feet financially. She sent out resumes, went to interviews, and tried to remember how to talk about herself with confidence instead of apology. And slowly, carefully, she let herself imagine a future that didn't include Marcus at all. The first sign that something was wrong came from an unexpected source. Arya's mother called late one evening, her voice tight with concern. Have you been on social media lately? No? Why? Marcus is posting about you on all his accounts. He's claiming you falsely accused him, that you're mentally unstable, that you cheated on him and are using abuse allegations to cover your guilt. Her mother's voice shook with anger. He's got photos, Arya. Old photos of you two together, smiling, looking happy. He's using them to prove you're lying. Arya felt her stomach drop. She deleted all her social media accounts the day she left, wanting to cut every digital tie to her old life. But Marcus still had access to their shared photos, their history, their carefully curated image of being a perfect couple. And he was weaponizing it. What do I do? Arya asked, her mind racing. Document it, screenshot everything, show it to your lawyer. Her mother paused. And honey, don't look at the comments. People who don't know the truth are saying terrible things. Don't give them space in your head. But Arya looked anyway. She created a fake account and found Marcus's posts, dozens of them over the past week, each one painting her as a vengeful ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept their breakup. The photos showed a version of their relationship that had never existed except in carefully staged moments. Arya smiling at a restaurant. Arya and Marcus kissing on a beach vacation. Arya looking at him with what could be mistaken for adoration, but was actually the careful maintenance of his ego. The comments were worse. Strangers who knew nothing about her life were calling her a liar, a manipulator, a woman scorned. They were taking Marcus's word as truth because the photos looked real and his performance was convincing. Arya took screenshots of everything and sent them to Detective Chen. "This is witness intimidation," Chen said when she called back. "He's trying to discredit you before trial, trying to turn public opinion against you, so if you testify, the jury sees you as unreliable. It's also a violation of the protective order. He's not supposed to be posting about you at all. Can we do anything? We can file a motion to have his bail revoked. Between the social media campaign and the electronic monitoring report showing he's been lingering near the boundaries of the restricted zones, we have grounds. I'll contact the prosecutor's office today, but the damage was already done." Arya's name was attached to Marcus's narrative now, spreading through social media like poison. Former co-workers from Meridian Analytics reached out with concerned messages, asking if the posts were true. Old acquaintances sent her private messages, ranging from supportive to accusatory. Arya learned another hard lesson about leaving an abuser. The court of public opinion didn't require evidence. It just required a convincing performance. She was standing at her apartment window, staring out at the city and trying not to spiral into despair when her phone rang. Dorian's name appeared on the screen. "I saw the posts," he said without preamble. "How are you holding up?" "I feel like I'm being punished for telling the truth," Arya admitted, her voice raw. "Marcus beats me for 3 years, and the moment I report it, I become the villain. How is that fair?" "It's not." Dorian's voice was hard. "But fairness isn't the goal right now. Survival is. And you're surviving, Arya. Marcus is desperate enough to risk bail violation by posting about you. That means he's scared. That means he knows he's losing." "It doesn't feel like he's losing. It feels like he's winning." "That's what he wants you to think. But in 3 days, there's a hearing to revoke his bail. The judge will see those posts, see the monitoring reports, see the pattern of continued harassment. And then Marcus goes back to jail until trial, and you get to breathe again." 3 days felt like an eternity, but Arya held on. She stopped looking at social media. She focused on therapy, on job applications, on building the life she wanted instead of defending herself against lies. And when the hearing came, she sat in the courtroom with Detective Chen on one side and Dorian on the other, watching Marcus perform innocence for the judge. "Your Honor, I'm simply exercising my right to free speech," Marcus's lawyer argued. "My client has been falsely accused of terrible things. He has a right to defend himself publicly. By posting intimate photos of the alleged victim and encouraging public harassment," the judge looked unimpressed. "Mr. Reeves, the protective order is explicit. No contact means no contact, including social media posts. And according to the electronic monitoring reports, you've been testing the boundaries of the restricted zones. Walking past Ms. Quinn's known locations, lingering near places she frequents. I was exercising in my neighborhood. Your neighborhood is 4 miles from Ms. Quinn's workplace. Try again." The judge shuffled papers, her expression stern. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted by the prosecution, the social media campaign, the monitoring violations, the continued attempts at contact through third parties. Mr. Reeves, you're not taking this protective order seriously. Therefore, I'm revoking your bail. You'll remain in custody until trial." Marcus's face went white, then red with fury. He turned in his seat, his eyes finding Arya across the courtroom. The look he gave her promised violence, promised retribution, promised that this wasn't over. But the bailiff was already moving to restrain him, and his lawyer was pulling him back into his seat, and the judge was banging her gavel. Marcus was going back to jail. Arya felt the tension she'd been carrying for weeks finally break. She didn't cry, she didn't celebrate. She just breathed, long and deep, feeling the weight of constant fear lift slightly from her shoulders. Outside the courtroom, Dorian turned to her with something that might have been pride in his eyes. "You did it. You stood your ground and you won." "We won," Arya corrected. "I couldn't have done this without you." "Yes, you could have. It would have been harder, lonelier, but you would have found a way. You're stronger than you know, Arya Quinn." The trial came 6 weeks later, just as Dorian had predicted. Arya sat in the courtroom wearing a navy suit and the last of her fading bruises, watching as the prosecutor laid out the case against Marcus. They showed the photographs Detective Chen had taken, every bruise, every mark, every piece of physical evidence. They played the voicemails Marcus had left, his voice alternating between rage and manipulation. They presented the electronic monitoring reports showing his violations, and then they called Jennifer Wallace to the stand. Jennifer walked to the witness box with her head high, and for the next hour, she told the jury everything. The isolation, the escalation, the choking incident that had finally made her run. She answered the defense attorney's attempts to discredit her with calm, clear responses. She never wavered, never backed down. "Mr. Reeves told me I was the love of his life," Jennifer said, her voice steady. "He said the same thing to Ms. Quinn. He used the same tactics on both of us. Isolation, gaslighting, gradually increasing violence. This isn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This is who he is. This is what he does." When it was Arya's turn to testify, she was terrified. But she thought about Jennifer's strength, about the woman she was becoming, about everyone who'd believed her when she finally found the courage to speak. She told the truth, all of it. The first time Marcus hit her, the apologies and promises, the escalation, the fear that lived in her bones. The moment Dorian noticed what no one else had seen, the decision to finally leave. Marcus's lawyer tried to shake her testimony, suggesting she was exaggerating, that the bruises could have come from anywhere, that she was a scorned girlfriend seeking revenge. Arya looked at the jury and spoke directly to them. "For 3 years, I made myself smaller and smaller, hoping that if I could just be perfect enough, he would stop hurting me. I gave up friends, gave up hobbies, gave up pieces of myself until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. And even then, it wasn't enough. Because the problem was never me. The problem was Marcus and his need to control another person through fear and violence." She took a breath, her voice steady. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm asking you to believe me, to believe the evidence, to believe that no one deserves to live in fear of the person who claims to love them." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned with a verdict, Arya sat between Dorian and Detective Chen, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Guilty on all counts. Assault, domestic violence, stalking, violation of a protective order. Every charge the prosecutor had brought. The judge sentenced Marcus to 6 years in prison with mandatory counseling and a permanent restraining order upon release. 6 years. It felt simultaneously like too much and not enough. But it was time. Time for Arya to heal, to rebuild, to become the person she was meant to be without fear shadowing her every step. As they led Marcus out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he tried one last time to catch Arya's eye. But she was already turning away, already moving toward the door, already leaving him behind. 3 months after the trial, Arya stood in her apartment because Dorian had transferred the lease to her name, and looked around at the life she'd built. She had a new job at a financial consulting firm, using her analytical skills to help small businesses thrive. Her supervisor was impressed with her work and had already hinted at a promotion. She had friends she saw regularly without needing permission or fearing interrogation afterward. She had therapy every Tuesday and yoga every Thursday and Sunday dinners with her mother. She had a life that was entirely, completely hers. The bruises had faded months ago. The fear took longer, but it was receding too, replaced by something that felt almost like peace. There was a knock at her door, 3 sharp raps in a pattern she recognized. Arya smiled and opened it to find Dorian standing in the hallway, holding a bottle of wine and looking less corporate than she'd ever seen him. He wore jeans and a black sweater, and something in his posture was different, less guarded. "I come bearing gifts," he said, holding up the wine, "to celebrate your promotion." Arya had called him that morning when her supervisor had made it official. Senior analyst, significant raise, corner office. She'd been so excited that she'd dialed his number before calling her mother, and only realized the significance of that after hanging up. Dorian had become more than her rescuer. He'd become her friend. "Come in," Arya said, stepping aside. "Fair warning, I'm a terrible cook, so dinner is takeout." "My favorite kind." They ate Thai food straight from the containers, sitting on Arya's couch and talking about everything except Marcus. About her new responsibilities at work, about Dorian's latest real estate acquisition, about the book Arya was reading and the documentary Dorian had watched. It felt normal, easy, like two people who'd chosen to spend time together rather than being forced together by crisis. "Can I ask you something?" Arya said as they finished eating, the wine warm in her system. "Always." "Why me specifically? Out of everyone you must see in that building every day, why did you notice me?" Dorian was quiet for a long moment, his wine glass held loosely in his hand. "You moved like Elena moved, carefully, like every step was calculated to avoid damage. And your eyes—" He paused. "Your eyes had the same look hers had in those last months, exhausted but alert, afraid but trying to hide it." He met her gaze. "I couldn't save Elena, but I could see you, and I couldn't walk away from that." "I'm not Elena," Arya said softly. "No, you're not." Dorian's expression was complicated, layered with old grief and something new. "Elena gave up. She went back to him one too many times, and it killed her. But you fought. You survived. You chose yourself over fear, even when it was terrifying. That's why you're here, and she's not." The words hung between them, honest and painful and true. "I think she'd be proud of you," Arya said, "for building all this, for helping so many women. I think she'd tell me to stop punishing myself and start living again." Dorian's smile was sad. "It's been 15 years, and I still feel like I need to earn forgiveness for failing her." "You didn't fail her. The man who killed her failed her. You're just trying to make sure no one else suffers the same fate. And I've succeeded with you." The way he said it, like she was more than just another woman he'd helped, like her survival mattered to him personally, made Arya's heart skip. "Dorian," she said carefully, "what is this? What are we?" "I don't know." His honesty was refreshing. "I've maintained careful distance from everyone I've helped over the years. Professional boundaries, clear separation. But with you, it's been different from the start. I can't quite categorize what we are." "Maybe we don't need to," Arya suggested. "Maybe we're just two people who found each other at the right moment, who helped each other survive, who want to keep knowing each other." "I'd like that." Dorian set down his wine glass and turned to face her fully. "But I need you to understand something. I will never push you, never expect anything from you. If this, whatever this is, stays friendship forever, that's enough. You don't owe me anything, Arya. Not gratitude, not obligation, not any kind of relationship you're not freely choosing." The careful respect in his voice, the absolute certainty that her autonomy mattered more than his desires, made Arya realize something she'd been dancing around for weeks. She was falling for him. Not the desperate, clinging love she'd mistaken for real with Marcus. Not the fear-based attachment that came from isolation and control, but something steadier, deeper, built on trust and respect and the knowledge that Dorian would never use his power to diminish hers. "What if I want more than friendship?" Arya asked, her heart racing. "What if I'm choosing that freely?" Dorian's eyes searched hers, looking for any hint of obligation or pressure. "Are you sure? You've been through trauma. Your judgment might still be—" "My judgment is fine." Arya moved closer, her decision made. "I've spent 3 months in therapy learning to trust myself again. Learning to recognize the difference between love and control. And Dorian, what I feel when I'm with you is nothing like what I felt with Marcus. You make me feel safe, seen, like I'm enough exactly as I am." She took a breath. "So yes, I'm sure. If you want this too." The smile that spread across Dorian's face was the most genuine expression she'd ever seen from him. "I've wanted this since the day you called me from that apartment and chose freedom. I've just been waiting for you to be ready." He kissed her then, soft and careful, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Arya leaned in instead, her hands finding his face, her heart full of something that felt remarkably like hope. When they broke apart, Dorian rested his forehead against hers. "We take this slow, at your pace, whatever you need." "I need you to stop treating me like I'm going to break," Arya said, smiling. "I'm stronger than I look. You of all people should know that."
Fair point. They stayed on the couch talking until past midnight, the conversation flowing easily now that they'd acknowledged what was building between them. Dorian told her about his sister, about the guilt he still carried. Arya told him about the woman she'd been before Marcus, about the dreams she'd abandoned and was slowly reclaiming. And slowly, carefully, they began building something new. Not rescuer and victim, not obligation and gratitude. Just two people who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to walk toward light together. 6 months later, Arya stood in front of a room full of survivors at the Advocacy Center, her hands shaking only slightly as she prepared to speak. Detective Chen had asked her to share her story with a support group, women who were in various stages of leaving their abusers, who needed to hear that escape was possible. Arya had agreed immediately, remembering how much Jennifer Wallace's testimony had meant to her.
"My name is Arya Quinn," she began, her voice steady. "And 3 years ago, I met a man who would spend the next few years systematically breaking me down. But I'm not here to talk about him. I'm here to talk about how I survived, how I left, and how I'm building a life that's entirely, completely mine." She told them about the bruises hidden under foundation,
About the careful calculations of survival, about the moment Dorian had seen through her lies and refused to look away, about pressing that emergency button and calling for help. "Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done," Arya said, looking at the faces in the room, women with similar stories, similar scars, similar fears. "But staying would have killed me. Maybe not all at once, but piece by piece, until there was nothing left of who I used to be. So I chose myself. And I'm asking you to consider choosing yourself too." She talked about resources, the apartments Dorian maintained, the legal advocacy available, the support systems that existed for women ready to leave. She gave them Detective Chen's contact information and the crisis hotline numbers. She offered her own phone number to anyone who wanted to talk to someone who'd walked this path before. "You deserve to be safe," Arya finished, her voice strong. "You deserve to live without fear. You deserve relationships built on respect instead of control. And I promise you, there is life after abuse. It's hard. It's scary. But it's worth it. You're worth it." The applause that followed was scattered but genuine. After the talk, women approached her with questions, with their own stories, with tentative hope in their eyes. Arya listened to each one, offered what guidance she could, and watched as seeds of possibility took root. This was her purpose now, turning her trauma into something useful, her survival into a roadmap for others. That evening, Dorian picked her up from the center. They'd been dating for 3 months, taking it slow just as he'd promised. He'd never once pushed for more than she was ready to give, never made her feel like she owed him anything. Their relationship was built on choice, mutual, continuous, freely given. "How did it go?" he asked as she slid into the passenger seat. "It was good. Hard, but good. I think I helped some of them." Arya looked at him, this man who'd seen her at her lowest and stayed anyway. "Thank you for that. For building the infrastructure that lets women like me survive." "Thank you for surviving," Dorian replied. "For proving that this work matters, that lives can be saved." They drove to his place, a penthouse apartment in Vex Tower that Arya had only recently started visiting. She was still getting used to the opulence, the way Dorian lived when he wasn't maintaining professional distance. But more than the expensive furniture and city views, she was getting used to the way he made her feel. Safe, valued, free. They cooked dinner together, moved around the kitchen in comfortable synchronization. They ate on the balcony overlooking the city, talking about their days, making plans for the weekend. Normal, domestic, beautiful. Later, curled up on his couch with a movie neither of them was watching, Arya felt a contentment she'd never experienced before. This was what healthy love felt like. Partnership without possession, intimacy without fear, respect without dominance. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words surprising even her. Dorian went still, then turned to face her fully. "You're sure?" Not feeling obligated, or, "I'm sure." Arya touched his face, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes.
I love you, Dorian Vex. Not because you saved me, though you did. Not because I owe you, though I'm grateful. I love you because of who you are. Because you make me laugh. Because you believe in my strength even when I doubt it. Because you've shown me what it means to be truly seen. The smile that spread across his face was pure joy. I love you too. I've loved you since the day you pressed that emergency button and chose yourself. Since the day you testified in court. Since every moment you've proven that you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. He kissed her then, and Arya kissed him back, feeling the last pieces of her broken past fall away. She would always carry the scars of what Marcus had done. But those scars didn't define her anymore. They were just evidence of what she'd survived, proof of her strength. 1 year after leaving Marcus, Arya Quinn stood in her corner office, looking out at the city that had witnessed her transformation. She'd been promoted again, was managing a team, was making more money than she'd ever thought possible. She had friends, hobbies, a relationship built on mutual respect. She had a life she'd chosen rather than one that had been chosen for her. Marcus was still in prison, serving his sentence. According to Detective Chen, he'd been disciplined multiple times for aggressive behavior and would likely serve his full term without parole. The permanent restraining order meant that even after release, he couldn't legally contact her. But Arya didn't spend much time thinking about Marcus anymore. He'd taken enough of her life. She wasn't giving him another second. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dorian. Dinner tonight? There's something I want to ask you. Arya smiled, typed back a yes, and returned to her work. Whatever Dorian wanted to ask, whatever came next in their relationship, she would face it with the same strength that had gotten her through everything else. Because Arya Quinn had learned the most important lesson of all. She was capable of saving herself. Everything else, Dorian's love, her career success, her rebuilt relationships, was just the beautiful aftermath of that fundamental truth. She'd survived, she'd healed, she'd chosen freedom, and nothing would ever take that away from her again. That evening, Dorian took her to the rooftop of Vex Tower, to the space where city lights glittered like stars and the world spread out below them in an endless map of possibility. I've been thinking, he said, taking both her hands in his, about what you said 6 months ago, about how we're two people who found each other at the right moment. I remember. You've transformed in the time I've known you, gone from someone hiding bruises to someone inspiring other survivors, from someone afraid of her own shadow to someone who walks through the world with her head high. His eyes held hers. And through all of it, you've taught me something important. What's that? That love doesn't mean saving someone. It means standing beside them while they save themselves. It means believing in their strength even when they can't. It means celebrating their victories and supporting them through their struggles without trying to control the outcome. Dorian took a breath. Arya, I don't want to rescue you anymore. I want to build a life with you, as equals, as partners, as two people who choose each other every single day. He pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring, simple, elegant, perfect. Marry me, Dorian said. Not because you owe me, not because I saved you, but because we make each other better, because we've built something real, because I love you and you love me, and that's enough reason. Arya looked at the ring, at the man offering it, at the life he was proposing. A year ago, she would have been terrified of commitment, of giving someone that kind of power over her life. But this wasn't Marcus demanding ownership. This was Dorian offering partnership. And Arya Quinn, who'd learned to trust her own judgment again, who'd reclaimed her strength and autonomy, knew exactly what she wanted. Yes, she said, smiling through tears. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed as the city lights blazed around them, two survivors who'd found each other in darkness and chosen to create their own light. The past no longer controlled her. The man who'd hurt her was locked away where he couldn't reach her. And in his place stood a woman who'd fought for her freedom and won, who'd chosen love on her own terms, who'd proven that survival was just the beginning of something beautiful. Arya Quinn had finally found what she'd been searching for all along, not safety that came from someone else's protection, but safety that came from her own strength. Not love that demanded she be less, but love that celebrated her becoming more. Not a life without scars, but a life where those scars became evidence of her courage. She was free, and she was never going back.